So, hello.
Hi.
Of course, my name is Sony Prosper, official title resident librarian at UVA Library, and this is
I am Sue Donovan. I am the conservator for special collections at the University of Virginia Library.
okay. Great. So, pleasure to be in conversation with you today.
You
Stu.
too.
Today we have a list of questions which will help to guide this discussion on preservation. So let's go ahead and begin. The first question is Sue. So, what is preservation exactly?
Yeah. So preservation um, is typically, we use that word to refer to a holistic approach to collections care. And so that's collections wide, focusing on the prevention of damage to items. So that means things that we can do with the environment, controlling the environment, controlling pests, and controlling what books and manuscripts and objects are actually housed within. So, and that's like protective housings, boxes, folders, things like that. Um, so, preservation is a general way of saying this is what we're doing to help um, make sure that the items on hand now last for the future. There's no direct intervention, so to speak. It's just a more general, holistic approach to that, how to care for objects.
Okay. And then you're also a book conservator. So, what is book conservation?
So, conservation is the flip side to preservation, and that is um, being a book conservator, I'm more concerned I'm very much concerned with the preservation of books, so the general conditions of the environment they're in, but I'm also a conservator, which means that I conduct treatments on specific individual books, manuscripts, things like that. So it's uh, it's a more targeted approach, an item by item level of addressing certain concerns. So a book will come to me that and it will have the spine is detached and the boards are detached, and I will figure out how to put those items back on.
Okay. So, could you elaborate a little bit on conservation being the flip side of preservation?
Um, well, I guess it's sort of like it's not necessarily flip side. It's more um, they are equal parts, and I would say that every conservator has a preservation background, but not every preservation manager has the hands-on conservation background. Now, that being said, um, a lot of current preservation directors were once conservators in their day-to-day jobs, but then have over the years their careers have evolved into being in charge of more items after they've gained a lot of knowledge from the hands-on item by item treatment level, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So my boss currently, she does have a background in preservation, but was not trained as a conservator. Um, but then there are people at other universities who do have that kind of conservation as well as preservation training.
And then, just for the record, who's your boss?
My boss is Kara McClurkin. She is the director of the preservation unit at University of Virginia Library.
Okay, great. So, let's see. Our next question is: what does preservation and conversation? What conservation? What,
I do that
what
all the
does
time.
preservation and conservation in practice look like?
Yeah. So, um, I was talking about my boss, Kara, and so that's typical. So there will typically be a director of preservation or conservation, and they will be in charge of everything that's happening within the libraries. So Kara is involved in conservation and preservation in general collections as well as special collections. And that's typically how it will play out. Um, and then underneath the director of preservation, there will be conservators, conservation technicians, et cetera, et cetera. And so we will be doing the actual hands-on treatment of items from special collections or the general circulating collections. Um, I am a special collections conservator, which is different from general collections conservation in that one big way is that I don't do what they call batch treatments. So a batch treatment is something that you see quite a bit for general collections conservation, where you do one step for multiple books all at the same time. So for books that are from the general collections circulating in students' backpacks all the time, you will typically do a batch treatment. So you'll remove the spine on 10 books,
Mhm.
put the boards back on 10 books all at the same time, and that makes it go faster because it's you don't really need to um, put a lot more effort into doing an item by item singular item treatment. For special collections, I'm doing a lot more thinking about the particular book that's in front of me. It could be a book from the 1400s, it could be a book from the 1900s, but it by nature of it being in special collections, it is has a historical context that I need to respect and think about. And so I don't do batch treatments. I do individual treatments that reflect my respect for that one specific item. Um, and because of that, because I understand that these manuscripts, because I deal with both. Um, because I understand like how unique they are, I work very, very closely with the curators and special collections. Um, they know the history that I have not had the time to learn. You know, they have this background in history in their specific realm of studies, whereas I have my background in conservation and science. So I rely very strongly on their expertise to help guide me to select the appropriate kind of treatment. So any treatment that I do, I get the blessing of the curators first. We often have a lot of emails back and forth. We're very open. Sony, you and I have talked as well about specific ways that we can go forward with treatments, or not necessarily that I do, but um, treatments for specific objects like textiles that we had to do last year.
Yeah. My,
Yeah.
my apologies. I send my congratulations because I think the is it the contractor, the conservation
Contract conservator. Uh-huh.
contract conservator did a good job, but also I'm sending my condolences because I'm sure it was tough work.
It yeah, she even said when she brought back the item that we're gonna need to have a little plastic baggie contained,
Yeah,
within the box because it's just still so fragile. So,
and then
there's
just for the
yeah,
record, what
yeah.
collection are we talking about?
We were talking about the, Oddfellows of Amherst County?
Madison County.
Madison County. Apologies for that, yeah. It was a really interesting collection, and I don't think we anticipated as many non-book items as what actually came with that collection. So that was really exciting to work with.
Okay, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about I guess the monitoring environment?
Yeah. So books, books and paper need to have a specific type of environment in order to last as long as possible. Um, Paper, when it's made, is very attracted to water, and so if paper is in a location that is either too dry or too wet, then there can be we can see damage that occurs within the paper itself. And the same can go for items that cover books that are used in the covering material of books, such as parchment and leather. So when we talk about environmental monitoring, we're talking about um, making sure that the humidity and the temperature are controlled in a specific environment. And if you've ever been down in special collections in the stacks, which I know you have, and maybe your students have as well, you'll notice that it is quite cold down there. And that is because essentially the colder a place is, the longer items will last. And the humidity is also regulated down there. So I think it's about 50% humidity down in the stacks. Um, and in addition to temperature and humidity controls and environments, we also want to make sure that there's not a lot of sunlight or light in general that is hitting these books and paper. Um, you may notice that if you leave a newspaper out in the sunlight, that within a very short amount of time, colors on the page will fade and the paper itself will start turning darker. It'll go from a kind of white cream color to a brown tan color. And that's what we're trying to avoid in the special collections by making sure that there's limited light, um, exposure to light, and limited and basic the, and keeping the temperature and humidity controlled.
Okay.
Um, in addition to environmental monitoring, I also mentioned pest control, which we like to call integrated pest management. And so, if you're ever walking around a library and you see little triangular shaped cardboard tents about this size, those have a sticky trap in them, and they collect data. And by data I mean tiny bugs. Um, they trap bugs there so that we can monitor the the traffic, if you will, of pests that are in these locations. And yes, it does sort of serve as a way to control the amount of bugs, but not really. It's more a way to really see what's behind the scenes. So if we see that there are tiny dermestid beetles um, in the sticky trap, then we'll know that we've probably got a problem and we need to start monitoring the organic materials. So dermestids are particularly attracted to any type of organic wool, paper as well, um, and so it's really important to keep that integrated pest management going. So you're monitoring it, you're seeing whether bugs are coming in from the outside as adults, or whether you're also seeing larvae um, and eggs, which can mean that you have an infestation where it's all of the life cycles of the pests, and you really need to get in there and make sure that that you take care of the infestation as soon as possible. It's pretty gross.
I didn't want to say that. You said it for me.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, so I think this kind of leads to the next question actually, which is what are some ongoing challenges when it comes to preservation and conservation work?
Yeah. So top of my mind is that sometimes it can be hard for conservators and curators to get on the same page in terms of treatment outcomes. I have been very lucky at University of Virginia and working with the curators there, where I've really not had a lot of um, issues with them. Like typically we can speak our minds and arrive at a compromise for the treatment. Whenever I have an item in front of me, I like to propose a couple options so that the curator can say what they find, can choose what they find is best for them. And often I found that when I've wanted to be a little more respectful and less invasive in terms of a treatment, the curators do as well. So that's I've really liked working with the curators here. That said, that's not always the case, and especially in museum settings, one problem can be curators who are wanting to showcase the items, have these items on display, and conservators being the little angel on the shoulder, so to speak, saying, You don't really want to do that for that long. It's not good for the artifact." You know, conservators pride themselves as being, um, we're the voice for these objects. We're their advocates in a way. That this painting or this manuscript can't speak for itself. So we're thinking about not what it's looking like now, but also what would happen to it in the future if this specific environmental um, display continues. So if it's getting a certain amount of light over 3 months of an exhibit, how is that going to affect its overall lifetime as an object? Um, so having those conversations with curators can be hard to get to get to a place where we both feel comfortable. Um, I would also say, for me, it can be difficult to um, when I'm first planning out a treatment for a very VIP item to really kind of let go of my own worry and my own fear about a treatment. And and so that I'm pretty sure that this is true for a lot of conservators, but it can be hard to divorce divorce yourself from the facts of the item, and the emotional um, baggage that comes with it. So, for example, the first treatment that I ever did when I came to the University of Virginia was tape removal on a Thomas Jefferson manuscript.
Yeah. Wow.
And tape removal is one of the most terrifying, time intensive, and stressful treatments that you can do in any situation. And add to that that it was my first treatment ever there at UVA. And it was also a Thomas Jefferson, our founding father and the founding father of UVA, his document. So um, you have to, as a conservator, com- constantly have the balance of, yes, this item is important. Um, but don't think about it too much, just do the treatment that you need to do, but also don't completely forget that it's really important. um so like maintaining that balance and that calm is very hard sometimes.
Mhm.
um and so sometimes I'll just be at my bench at my workspace, and I'll just be sitting thinking and looking into space, kind of walking through my head what treatment steps I'm going to do and what problems could arise, so I can try to see that before I before I mess up, or so I'm just constantly trying to think in my head um, what I could do, um, and to figure out where the problems could arise, and try to figure that out beforehand. Um, other ongoing challenges. Conservation is often, we try to do the we strive for treatments to be the least invasive possible, and for treatments to be as reversible as possible.
Mhm.
um, and and so um, that can also be difficult. It can be a challenge. um, when access is also very important. Um, so sometimes, we'll get a book, an item that has obviously lived a long life. It's I'm thinking in particular um, of David Walker's Appeal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that is an incredible document, and it sounds like maybe you've talked to your students about it. Um, but so when it came to me, um, it it had clearly been rebound, and in a way that had kind of that had hidden the way that it had originally been bound and distributed. But um, instead of taking it all apart, completely apart, and sewing it as if it had looked when I thought it had originally been distributed, um, I took an approach of less less invasive treatment. So I removed the spine because it was damaged, and I I redid the spine in a way that mimicked or matched a little bit better with what the rebinding was. And my decision making for that was that it had been rebound at a time which showcased that whoever did it really respected that book originally, and the original marks of how it had originally been distributed were still there, so you could still see that it had once been a pamphlet binding. It had once been distributed like in this way between blue paper, but also it still had the markings of its history since then with it. And I thought that was really important to keep those steps of history with the book, to preserve that historical context.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot to balance and juggle at all times.
I mean, if you want to talk more about David Walker's Appeal, we can do that too.
Okay.
Okay. So next question is what might preservation and conservation work within communities with minimal resources look like?
Hmm. Um, so typically I would say that what you would be looking at for minimal resources would be on the more preservation side of things. So trying to prevent damage, but you don't necessarily have the funding to do an treatment by treatment level intervention at the time. So we're probably looking at using folders, using sleeves, so mylar sleeves, paper sleeves, um, boxes, excuse me, things like that, where you can control the space that the items are in and thus prevent future damage, but continue to allow for future access as well.
Okay. And I think in the last question you talked about incorporating new techniques, and I guess you just talked about this as well for this current question. Are there any other like techniques that these resource scarce communities or groups or institutions might be able to use when it comes to
Mhm.
preservation? You talked about boxes, you talked about folders using
Mhm.
mylar, just making sure that we're covering most of the bases.
Uh, yeah, I think.
Chemical processes or anything like that?
I'm sorry.
Any like basic chemical processes using basic chemicals in your house, or would you even recommend that or no?
No, typically I wouldn't recommend
Yeah,
getting involved in using chemicals or anything like that.
yeah.
Um, except on a case by case by basis, where you could be in contact with a conservator.
Mhm.
Um, there is some simple humidifying and flattening that institutions and communities with minimal resources can do. So that's, if you've got a scroll that's bunched up, um, that you would be able to fairly easily um, humidify and flatten it on your own. Um, but you know, y- there's a lot that can be done and a lot of access that can be preserved, just by simple housing techniques and making sure that the folders and papers that you use are good quality. So that means you don't want them to be acidic. Preferably, you want folders um, to be buffered. So that means they have a slightly alkaline content, which can help prevent the documents themselves um, from further decaying, from further acid degradation. Um, and even just using simple photo sleeves that you can buy online from conservation producers. I'm sorry for lack of a better word. They have photo sleeves where a lot of communities might have a whole lot of photographs, old photographs of different types, and just putting them inside these photo sleeves can really be helpful. Yeah.
So so here we're talking about, I guess, some of like the basic elements of a of a of a preservation program, right? So we're talking about environmental control.
Hmm.
We're talking about storage and handling. Um, but and this is a new question.
Hmm.
What what does preparing for disaster planning or security, what might that look like?
Uh, um, so for I think as much as we can prepare for disasters,
Mhm.
we want to um, anticipate what kinds of disasters could happen in a region. Um, and a disaster can be something as simple as a water leak or fire. And so communities or people who have archives in their own homes should think about keeping their priceless documents out of attics, out of basements. Um, Basically, wherever you are most comfortable is where your documents and your photographs will be most comfortable. Um, so, if you keep your home 70 degrees, but you keep your documents in a 90-degree attic, those items are gonna, they're gonna deteriorate a lot faster. And an attic is also subject to water leaks, to fires, as well as in basements. Um, you know, we can't really prepare for things that well all the time. So some floods happen, tornadoes happen, um, and the best thing to do is to know who to contact should disasters happen. So there are conservation groups out there who specialize um, in doing on-site conservation uh, salvage. I would say, and there's a group that's called the Blue Shield, and that's an international foundation that sends trained conservators to disaster sites, things like that. Um, with the COVID-19 thing that's happening right now, I'm home. I'm not able to be on grounds right now. So what I'm doing is I'm going into my lab every week and I'm making sure that the water's okay. The water's running because I use a deionized water system, which has to run every a couple times a week. So I'm doing that. I'm communicating with the special collections people to make sure that the HVAC, so that's the humidification, ventilation, and air conditioning, that those units are functioning, that they're going to be staying on, so that the special collections books are, they're in a safe environment, even though the people aren't there to actually see them. Um, if I can go on more about what to do if your items do get wet, which tends to happen. I think that's probably the disaster we see the most, because if there's a fire, they're going to put out the fire with water. Um, Floods happen. Leaks are probably the number one cause of damage that I've seen recently. Um, so there are small steps you can take, that will go very far. But I don't know if we have time for that today.
Okay, so Sue, thank you for taking time out during,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, this evolving public health crisis. Much appreciated. You're appreciated. Do you have any last words, comments?
Um, no, I appreciate you letting me talk. It's something that I'm very passionate about. And I've been pursuing conservation for quite a while, since I was in college. I didn't find out about it until I was in college, actually. So it's ongoing. I learn something with every treatment, every new treatment I do. I'm learning, um, and it's always a pleasure to hear questions, from people like you, from your students, people who are outside who want to know more, because that always helps me refocus and understand, what I mean to you and what I mean to the library. So it's always very helpful for me to hear your feedback.
You know what you mean to me. Come on. Okay. Thank you, Sue.
Yeah, thank you
Um,
so much, Sony.
Again, so this is, of course, your lecturer, Sonny Prosper, and this is Sue Donovan, book conservator extraordinaire. Um, so thank you. Okay, bye.